Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's call, The Evolutionary Shift from Egologue to Dialogue. My name is Craig Siglampaglia, and I'll be your technical host for the call this evening. I am also a member of Vistar Foundation, and if you are not familiar with who Vistar is or what we do, we are a nonprofit foundation based in Stamford, Connecticut, founded by Victoria and Ron Friedman, the co-host of tonight's call. They are pioneers in the field of collective consciousness, and they have dedicated their lives to helping hundreds of individuals realize their true potential. The mission and purpose of Vistar is to access, explore, and share the power and potential of collective consciousness for collective awakening, co-creation, and communication. If you want some more detailed information on the foundation or the meeting structure, the Vistar method of communication that we're going to be using this evening during one part of the call, please feel free to visit our website at www.vistarfoundation.org. I'm very pleased to announce that joining Ron and Victoria on the call tonight is Ashok Gangadine, a professor of philosophy at Haverford College in Pennsylvania and founder and director of the Global Dialogue Institute. There is a tremendous amount we can say about this amazing man, his journey, and his illustrious career, but I'm going to hold off a little bit because Victoria is going to give us a more detailed background and introduction on both Ron Friedman and Ashok. So before we get started, just want to mention that the Maestro conference calling system we're using tends to be somewhat sensitive, and occasionally you might experience a slight technical problem. If you get kicked off or something happens, you might need to call back in or log back into the phone call. If you experience any more difficulty beyond that, please feel free to email me at craigskig, CRAIGSCIG @gmail.com, and I will see if I can troubleshoot what's going on and help you get back into the call. All right, so I'm going to turn it over to Victoria Friedman, and she's going to get us started.
Hello, everyone. Craig, am I on?
You're on.
Okay, thank you. Hello, welcome, everyone. We're so excited to be here with you, and we want to thank you for joining us on this call, especially to thank you for your interest in this topic, the evolutionary shift from egologue to dialogue, and that is so relevant in every aspect of our lives and the evolution of humanity and of our planet. So I want to tell you about the agenda for this call. We're going to start with some opening remarks and comments from Ashok Gangadine, and also with comments and considerations from Ron Friedman, and then they will start a dialogue between them. And after that dialogue, I will give a short introduction to the Vistar method and the 4 guide rules, and then we will enter into collective dialogue. And I'll invite all of you to join into the conversation and add your voices to this very cutting-edge topic. And then after that, we'll follow with a question and answer section and some closing statements. So before I introduce our speakers, I just want to say a special thank you for Dr. Janet Smith-Warfield. Janet, I know you're on the call, and we'll be hearing your voice later in the circle. And thank you so much for connecting us with this amazing man, Ashok, and what's come from it, and all the great conversations. So it's so great to co-create with you, Janet. And you'll be hearing her voice later in the circle. So now I am thrilled to introduce you to our 2 speakers. First of all, Ashok Gangadine. So as Craig said, Ashok is the Margaret Guest Professor of Global Philosophy at Haverford College for the past 43 years. He completed his PhD in philosophy at Brandeis University, and his early work focused on logic, the science of thought, and ontology, the science of being. Throughout his career, he has been on a quest of the primal integral logic at the heart of human reason, and in bringing to the fore the deep dynamics of communication and dialogue between diverse worldviews. In this quest for over 4 decades to clarify and excavate the common ground across and between widely diverse worlds, cultures, and ideologies and disciples, he has emerged as a pioneer of a new frontier of global reason, global ethics, and global wisdom. He's the founder and director of the Global Dialogue Institute, which seeks to embody the powers of deep dialogue in all aspects of cultural life. If you've not heard or seen Ashok, he is charismatic, he's extremely passionate, and I think you'll find him brilliantly humorous. So we're really looking forward to that. And also we're going to hear from Ron Friedman, co-founder of the Vistar Foundation, and Ron Friedman is a physician, a lecturer, and a poet. His background in collective community began in a kibbutz in Israel where he was born, and he lived there for 8 years. And he's always speaking about the closeness to nature and appreciation and gratitude for the beauty and mystery of life. He completed his BA in physics at Columbia University. He received a medical degree from New York University School of Medicine. He did research at Walter Reed Institute for Research and pathology training at Harvard Medical School. His spiritual path led to studies with teachers such as Gurdjieff and Rudolf Steiner, and to teachings and practices in the non-dual traditions with Canadian metaphysician Kenneth G. Mills. Ron is a pioneer in the field of collective evolutionary consciousness with 25 years' experience with intensive spiritual group work, and he developed the evolutionary Vistar method for circles for collective awakening, co-creativity, and communication. Ron is a scientist, a mystic, and a poet. His poetry book we published in 2013. I'm not biased when I say you'll be hearing from the heart of radiant love. So listen carefully. Ashok, I turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Victoria, for your very gracious opening and introduction. And I'm honored to be with you, Ron, on this call. Craig, thank you for orchestrating us and keeping us in the ballpark here. I am going to speak for about 10 minutes or less in the spirit of opening up deep dialogue in our conversation and to open up some themes that speak to what is an evolutionary emergence of dialogue. What does it have to do with the great wisdom across this planet and the great enlightenment teachers and our great scriptures, east, west, north, and south? And I'm going to talk about the challenge of dialogue, because when we use the word dialogue, it's very much all around us in the culture. But people often don't realize that dialogue is not between two. It means dialogos, through the logos. The logos from the Greek is the field, the fundamental field of language, script, meaning, the light of reason, the word, the fundamental word. So all of that is tied in to this illustrious word logos. And when we're in the logos, we're dialogos, through the logos, we're connecting in a deep way. And that really raises a wonderful theme across the planet, because one of the things we learn in the depth of dialogue is that people are raised naturally in a certain cultural orientation from day one, or even before that, all the way through, in their parenting, and childhood, schooling, and acculturation. They're forming, let's call it a lens of the mind, L-E-N-S, a lens, as if it's the lens of the eye or the lens of a camera. It's through which you see. And that metaphor of the lens is that the world you live in and how you see yourself and see others and speak and listen through that lens shapes your world and your culture and your reality, and all of your experience comes through that. But what we don't seem to be sensitive enough to often in our educational processes and upbringing is that when we cross worlds into different worlds, we don't realize we're going into a very different mental ecology, a different grammar of reality. It's a different way of making sense, a different way of seeing and putting the world together, experiencing it. So, for example, if someone is raised in a highly complex, what we call the Judeo-Christian tradition, let's say, and to realize that that's highly complex, it's multi-lens already. But if someone is trying to enter the Hindu world and go into the world of yoga, and to understand samsara and karma and dharma and prana, and even to do yoga in that with transmigration and incarnation, it's a very different mental ecology. And if we go into the Chinese mind, say the classical mind, if we listen to Lao Tzu, where he says that the Tao that is named is not the Tao, and we understand Feng Shui and Qi and all of yin and yang, all of it's a very different world again. And if you do acupuncture, it's a different kind of anatomy, a different procedure altogether. So in other words, when we cross worlds and worldviews or mental ecologies, what makes sense in one world often does not make sense in the other. So the immediate challenge is, how can we communicate? Can I really speak to someone in the yoga mind, or someone in the Buddha mind, or someone in the Zen space, or in certain African modes of thought, or in Lakota, or in feminist modes? As we cross these borders, we really need to gain sensitivity to listen and dilate our hearts and mind and open before the other, to allow the other to speak in her voice and not to impose our lens on the other, which is known to be a form of violence. You slash the other person with your lens unintentionally, but if you're not sensitive, just the need to step back, there can be some real violence to the other, which has been chronic. And so we've had so many clash of worlds all through our history, abysmal violence, ethnic cleansing, breakdown clashes of worlds, 9/11, Holocaust, genocides, racism, sexism. All of these pathologies trace to the lens issue of not being able to enter dialogue, dialogos, and open our hearts and mind and our being to the other. And we need a culture of dialogue that has been long and painfully emerging across our planet. So therefore, if we step back from our particular orientation, whatever lens or lenses we have, and dilate our hearts and mind, and dare to open and step into a wider, let's call it a global lens, a global space, where we can be open to multiple worlds and views and religions and scriptures, and be open to listening to them in this open dialogue space, the deep dialogue space, we'll begin to see remarkable evolutionary emergence and patterns that are striking, that we have not seen it so clearly. And one of the main themes for tonight, in terms of from egologue to dialogue, if we could listen in this deep global space, you'll see that Socrates was attempting to open up dialogue. In fact, Plato wrote dialogues. Buddha saw that if people are living in a certain way, let's call it a monocentric or egocentric view of the world and a way of looking at themselves with that lens, people suffer. That was one of his great breakthroughs in wisdom of Buddha's enlightenment, that egologue is suffering because it's cut off from reality, which is a flow of interconnectivity. That's one of the great insights we hear across the planet, whereas it's Tao or Yahweh or Om or Allah or energy, whatever name is used for the primal field, there's been a consensus of wisdom that there is a primal force. We can't get around that. And it can't be finite. It must be infinite. And if it's infinite, then it's infinitely unified. And if it's infinitely unified, then everything is connected. If everything's connected, the dialogue flow is on. That's the field of reality. So the evolutionary issue is that our great wisdom teachers and visionaries and scriptures across the planet in diverse ways have been calling us to step forth beyond egologue or monologue, where we're I-it. We make ourselves objects and we're I-it. But if we could dilate and make the shift, a very challenging shift, into deep dialogue, into real dialogue, we enter a field in which we experience ourselves in the other and the other within us. And that's what our great teacher says, that's the heart of moral consciousness. So when Jesus said, when I was in prison, you visited me, and when I was hungry, you fed me, he was speaking the I-thou language, the Christ language. When Krishna is teaching Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita to step into the Om, into the Gandhi space, let's call it, where we understand that the non-violence of being in the Om field, where everything is flowing in harmony, that's the moral space. And the Buddha's compassion, that's the moral space. So everything is at stake for us on the planet. If we remain lodged in egologue, violence, breakdowns in human relations, in the workplace, in democracy, all of these I hope we'll talk about tonight. And our great teachers have been calling us to upscript into a deeper script, a holistic, integral dialogue place where we could really be nonviolent and compassion with each other. And the human family longs for this shift now. So I'll just pause here and turn it over to you, Ron. And I hope I didn't go on too long. I wasn't watching my time here.
Not at all, Ashok. Thank you for that wonderful, sweeping overview of what we both love, the area that we have chosen to focus on, and the area that we've been called to focus on. It's a privilege to be speaking with you, and welcome to the audience of participants who are here on this wonderful topic. I want to approach it, having been given this overview by Ashok, I want to approach it from the point of view of our experience and touch on those issues which were raised by Ashok from a experiential intense point of view. In other words, I want to look a little bit at what we have done relative to what was talked about. And I'm not going to go into too much detail now. We may touch on this a little bit later. But the question that occurs to me, and that obviously occurs to many, many people at this point in time, where so many issues confront us, so complex and so mired in dualistic thinking, is where is the point of maximum leverage? Where is the point where we make our effort to influence so many issues at the same time? And from my point of view, and many other people, it is in terms of dialogue, the dialogue process, and that means a great deal. It is not something simple. As Ashok said, dialogue is indeed a challenging process, and it has to be looked that way. We at Vistar, since 1994, and of course many years earlier, I participated in group work, but since 1994 have really been involved with a collective, we can call it a collective consciousness, although we did not realize this was the case in the beginning. But it was a collective process which we eventually realized had some remarkable qualities to it. And we met in a very intense way for many, many years. In our group were people of diverse backgrounds, both educationally and financially. There were men and women. And don't underestimate the importance of an intense experience with both men and women. This is an issue, whenever people come together, this is a force in the field which needs to be reckoned with and understood. Well, we became aware that the way we worked after many years was unusual and had qualities of opening up a group intelligence and a group creativity which was absolutely remarkable. Many of you know that we formed a theater group, and this went on for 8 years, and we performed the works of Rumi and Mirabai and took this all over the Northeast, including the United Nations. But the main thing about the work was that it was flexible, it was dynamic, and it was capable of evolving. Whatever method we're going to have in a new society, whatever method of dialogue, and we're going to desperately need this kind of dialogue, we're going to have to be able to evolve together with the evolving society. In fact, it may in itself serve as a prototype for social structures and new relationships which will evolve and emerge in that society. So the social implications of dialogue are many. The implications of dialogue as influencing the course of humanity are ones that are beginning to be appreciated now. I particularly love the work of Rupert Sheldrake. I know, Ashok, you're going to have him as a guest speaker at Haverford. And his work is fascinating and is very worthwhile to consider from the point of view of the importance of any gathering where dialogue is practiced with a vision and understanding of how it interacts with the history of humanity, the evolution of humanity. So let me stop there and let's consider some of these wonderful topics that Ashok and I have touched on. Perhaps we can begin to develop a little bit more. What is this dialogue from an evolutionary perspective? What are its evolutionary elements? How does it fit into evolution as we understand it at this point in time? Perhaps, Ashok, you can speak to that.
Well, thank you, Ron, for your very beautiful opening remarks. It was very rich and so much to really develop further. From an evolutionary point of view, and that's one of the points I was trying to open up, is stepping into the global space and having before us the transformations of the Bhagavad Gita or Buddha's insight into the field where everything co-arises, or the chi energy where everything is connected. The dual and the non-dual. The unified field is called non-dual, but that can be misleading. It's more interesting to call it integral and holistic. It's an overflow of interrelaced relations at all levels. Everything is woven together in deep vibrational frequencies and flow. And from an evolutionary point of view, it's a fabric of reality itself. And the question about human culture emerging and language and interpretations, worldviews, and ideologies as part of our evolutionary development, dialogue has been a driving force, because to the extent that it was normal or natural in our human development to begin to use monologue, which means what? What is dualistic language? We need to pause and look at that. It is living the simplicity of a naive identity. The law of identity dominates the dualistic world and culture. And it's a very compelling, simple principle. A is A. And who can argue with that? One thing, one word, one name picks out one thing and names it and is riveted to it, so to speak. But we don't realize that when you live by that natural law of identity, and I have my name, you have your name, everything has a name, a child is learning the language, it's very natural to do that. But our great wisdom teachers saw that if you live your life based on identity, it puts everything in its separate atomic space, so to speak. An atom is a kind of violence. It makes it separate from the field. It's cut off. So if you're living a life of identity, as precious as you may feel about your own identity, you form a monologue, an egocentric, a monocentric way of living that cuts you off from the field of flow. So the evolutionary drama is that if it's adaptability, to borrow the Darwinian metaphor, that you have to adapt and morph to be in concert with reality, or you'll perish. So that the call to dialogue is to be in sync with the fabric and flow of reality itself. So as you beautifully pointed out, if we understood the technology of dialogue and the depth of it, that it's an interplay where you have to open to the other, and open to each other, and open to the ecology and the environment, that technology of dialogue opening so that you can flow and be in the zone, so to speak, in reality, as it unfolds and shifts and grows, is a very powerful adaptive method and a nonviolent method to be in sync with the other. So I'll just turn it over to you and have you reflect on that, Ron, please.
Well, that's really, I think, what at the heart of dialogue, the dialogue process. This may be a little bit bold, but I would say in what you're describing is the very evolution of the experience of identity, the evolution of identity, because we know that from a experiential point of view, to participate in dialogue, when it reaches those levels of frequency, which we know it can, we experience a sense of spaciousness and inclusiveness of the other in a way that does not exist in our ordinary dualistic consciousness. So that unity actually becomes a fact of experience. And I wonder sometimes, people speak a great deal about unity and about love, but I wonder what they mean by that, because the direct experience of it, in a sense, is essential. But the evolution of identity into the I, thou, we is something that we have seen in its incipient phases as such an important evolutionary element, and one which proceeds in such a subtle way that many times we're not even aware of it. But we open up these invisible connections to people, to everything around us, and especially to people in the group, to such a point that we begin to develop connections with them that actually border on the paranormal. But this is the result of very, very intense relationship. And relationship itself, relationship to our identity, the way we're speaking about it, relationship itself is being defined in an evolutionary sense through dialogue.
I liked it very much. I think it was beautifully expressed to see that, because we have a phobia about letting go of our identity as we know it and love it and have developed it. And yet all of our great wisdom teachers are urging us in some way to perform a ritual, a rite of passage from letting that identity go, whatever it may be, the attachment to our narrative, to our story. That's a more monologue, ego-log kind of orientation, to then step up to awaken the self in an evolutionary awakening and maturation. It's moving from an ego pillar to a Buddha fly, to play with that a little bit. That when you mature as a human, you become an I-thou being. So I think you say it beautifully. When you are capable of entering into relationships, yourself, your identity matures and deepens. But people have a phobia that by letting go of my story as I know it, and daring to allow myself the vulnerability of entering into the open space of dialogue and the risk-taking that comes with that, one finds an amazing dilation of one's being. In fact, the word individual, which means, if you think about it, we think for the ego-based person, I'm an individual, I'm me. But really, individual means non-dual. Individual is dual, individual means undual. So when you go into integrity, when you're more awakened and in the zone, athletes love to talk in my classes, which are powerful labs of dialogue. The students who are athletes and know that when they're in the zone, when they're running and they're just in this deeply blissful peak performance of relationship with their ecology, and they're at their very best, or on the team, when the soccer team just reaches that magic alchemy, that somehow they're clicking together. They're not doing it by ego intention. It's just swept up into an energy field where the right wing is putting the ball to the center forward, the goalie on the opposite side is moving beautifully. It's like ballet. Or jazzing together when you step out of the ego. These are all great examples of that relationship, of jazzing together.
Absolutely. It is when it happens, when it's at that frequency, it is that. I've always loved, by the way, the game of volleyball, and how many people are willing to accept the rules of teamwork. But, you know, the examples that you're giving and the kind of dialogue work that we have done touch on the whole area of motivation. Even in the classroom or on the basketball court, there is a very strong motivation which may exist at one level of frequency or another. But the motivation is very important. The quality of intention in entering dialogue, we have always felt, is a step-up transformer when aligned to the quality of the dialogue that will follow. So the issue of motivation, I think, is very, very important. We were once asked in an interview, after describing the Vistar process, do you think that this can be brought to the United Nations? And the question, the answer is, it really depends. It really depends on the willingness of the individuals involved to go beyond their separatist national agenda or an agenda of humanity. So the issue of motivation, I think, is very important. What do you think of that, Ashok?
I think that's a very fundamental point. And really, from the moral point of view, if you've read Kant or Aristotle or Buddha or Krishna on the question of what crossing into moral awakened consciousness, which is the I-thou practice, where you're open to the other and to your ecology and to your environment, and not imposing your more restrictive perspective, myopic perspective on it, that is a beautiful place of motivation. So the question, the all-important question for a moral life is, if you're motivated from an egocentric point of view and not rather out of reverence for the law, for the Dharma, for the honor code, to just respect and love the law that's woven into the field, the I-thou law, which is the heart of ethics. That's the golden rule. That the motivation determines the nature of the action. And so I think, for example, in any collective enterprise, and I think you beautifully pointed this, if you come in and sit there in your egocentric mind and myopic monocentric perspective, it's going to kill dialogue flow. But if you dare to come in and are willing to open and dilate and step forward and let the energy of the larger space open up, that's a wholly different motive. The word motive is a mental cause. What is causing the agent to act? And if you have an ego motive, it closes down. If you have a dialogue motive, a logos motive, then you are ready to open up. So, for example, in a Quaker meeting, I think the practice is to check your ego at the door, come into the sacred space, face each other, and let the Christ and the higher voice speak. And you sit in silence as long as it takes. No one is going to ego speak. And when the spirit of that room moves your heart to speak, and you quake, you shake, because it's a higher energy speaking through you. That creates a wonderful communion in the group. And that's one model of what you're talking about, where motivation is so important for the cultivation of dialogue.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, and going back for a moment to the evolutionary point of view about dialogue, when we consider that, in a sense, the process of differentiation of the individual has been taking place for so long in our human history, and perhaps it had to be. It's interesting to look at people coming together now in dialogue relative to an evolutionary movement, which is actually perhaps necessary, which is an evolutionary imperative perhaps, that perhaps now the difference from our tribal history to get to this place now, this form of dialogue, is that we are now in a conscious space, or a space that is seeking a conscious contact with each other and exploring a field that before was represented by a medicine man, by a guru, that this difference actually a huge evolutionary step. I wonder what you think about that. And that explains some of the difficulty in dealing with the ego that must come up in all of these sessions if they are ongoing.
That's a great remark there, Ron. And I feel that our great teachers saw that. What I would rather bring out is that it's not that one loses one's identity, individuality, and uniqueness by entering into the open space of dialogue. Right, something has to be let go. If you have a limited myopic story and you've been wedded to that story, let's call it your ego-based identity or monocentric identity, and that's blocking you from going into a relationship, into the sacred space. Dialogue is a sacred space because it is the web of presence to enter into presence. So your whole being has to dilate. What happens, though, the mystery of that, is that you gain, you said it earlier, it's an evolution of identity from a closed identity to an open, fractal, beautifully ever-deepening identity. You discover your depth and your uniqueness. In other words, a field of dialogue is an infinitely open field. And in the Buddhist way of putting it, Indra's net is an infinite field with infinite points. Each jewel is shining. This is why Blake could say that there's infinity in a grain of sand and eternity in an hour. Because in that field, it's boundlessly deep, and imagine going into that depth and discovering who you are.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. We agree with that by our experience, that the individual actually undergoes an experiential process which makes being one of many in this new sense of identity so attractive that that is the basis of the actual movement of this I-thou process. I think it happens. We have seen it in our group. We have seen that for a long period of time, people were related to the movement of the group in an old model. But as the years went by, what happened was that there was a demand actually in the evolution of the group itself, because the group is a receptor of the evolutionary impulse, to actually express their individuality more and more. This seems to be an actual demand of the dialogue setting. It seems strange to say that, but this has been something that we have seen. There's a new integration of the individual with the group, and one of the ways that has happened in our group is through the creative process. The ability to co-create allows the individual to express something so essential, so close to their true nature, that it resolves the conflict between the ego and the group. I wonder what you think about that.
That's very important. Thank you for bringing up the question of co-creation and creativity in the dialogue space, because the alchemy that happens when you're jazzing, the spontaneity, so good word is spontaneity, improvisation, not bringing in a pre-scripted agenda. So the open space of where everything is co-arising, as Buddha would say, and woven together. If we dare to open up to surf that, there's going to be a depth of creativity and co-creativity. That's the model that comes from the I-Thou. We play off of each other. So a dialogue itself is a creative dance in which we're jazzing and improvising. And in that evolutionary space is what's called emergence. Something new emerges that we never would have had before. Let me give you an example. I mean, my institute, Global Dialogue Institute, and I've really developed 7 stages of deep dialogue to embody in practice in groups that we work with around the world, diplomats in Geneva who don't know how to cross worlds and negotiate, relationships at the UN, as we raised that point earlier. If we don't have dialogue in the culture of the UN, how can we be a United Nations with monologue? It's not going to work, and we're hitting walls there. Interreligious dialogue. I worked with a group, a very high-level group in New York called the Partnership of Faith, of the eminent leaders of the different religions in the space of the New York City area, of the synagogues and the mosques and the temples and churches, cathedrals. They were all there. They've been meeting for years, and they were not getting very far. They would come to the table and stand in their faith and speak from that point, and it wasn't working. So they asked me to come in. They learned about the deep dialogue process, and I introduced the 7 stages of deep dialogue in a workshop with them, for them to work on that meditation, to see and feel when you're in ego log and you're not seeing the other, and when you finally realize, oh my God, that other is speaking a whole different language. I haven't been listening. Can I go there? Can I enter into that? It's scary. Do I dare to cross over? That's stage 1. And if you do open up and cross over, you see that it's a whole different way of seeing the world. It's a mind opener. And imagine 7 stages, step by step, going deeper. We took them through that. And by the end of the day, after lunch, they were just smiling and beaming, a new energy opened up, and that group felt, oh my God, we can now have dialogue. We weren't dialoguing, we were in monologue before. It changed the whole nature of that organization in a huge way, along the lines you're talking about. You don't lose if you're a believer in Christ. You don't lose it. You deepen it. If you're a believer in Allah, it deepens. If you're of a Jewish orientation and that's your faith, it deepens rather than gets erased. So that's how the identity evolves and deepens in the dialogue process.
Yes, it is. I mean, that's beautiful, and it is a dance when people, when the frequency reaches a certain level. Some people use different words, a resonance for it, and then it happens. And we're talking really about coming to a very deeper place within people where that resonance, that motion, that movement is actually natural. It's natural. I want to touch on something that you mentioned, which is the listening process. The listening process itself. Because I wonder whether you have been involved in teaching the listening process. I don't know how this works in your classes, but listening and hearing, of course, are 2 different things. Attention in dialogue is a mystery. And so what we have found is that one needs to approach listening in dialogue process in a very different way. It is not the kind of constricted, the the opposite constriction of the using the image of the eye. It's not the reverse of dilatation. It is really a constriction of the pupil, of the dialogue process, in which we do not open to this field between us. So that the issue of listening and attention is very, very important. And we have had exercises in the areas of listening. I wonder what your experience has been with this particular issue.
Well, it's all important, Ron, listening. And, what typically happens, if you follow the great texts, whether it's Buddha and the disciples, or Krishna dialoguing with Arjuna, or Socrates when he's about to drink the hemlock in the prison, and his disciples are in a different space, believing in the body is real and that he's going to die, and Socrates is trying to model and teach them a higher way of understanding how to reach immortality as he drinks the hemlock. How do you listen across two different languages is the question. You can have the greatest attention, but if you listen with your old lens, you won't get it. So Jesus got frustrated when he was trying to communicate with his disciples, and they were just about dying and being born again and so forth. And at one point he just said, for those who have ears, let them hear. What are those ears? Well, they're dialogue ears. They're not ego ears. And to listen then is to cultivate that openness to really hear the other in the voice that she speaks from. That means you have to recode and try to understand the meme or the grammar or the code of the other to truly listen. But most of us listen in a monologue way where we take the other and put them through our processor, and that's not real deep listening. So you're touching on a very fundamental point in the art of dialogue and the alchemy of dialogue. How do you truly open your heart and mind to really listen and receive the other? And this goes across the board. If I go to the museum to see the Van Gogh painting, and I'm living an I-it life, and I-it is the ego-log where you objectify everything, and you use your lens to interpret it. And I heard a lot about this great Van Gogh painting, and I go and I look at it, and I say, gee, it's $3 million. It's like, I wish I could get closer, and look at all the people around. And that's your experience. You're missing completely listening to the work. But to dare to be able to open up and stand and allow to have an intimate I-thou relationship with it. The thou is sacred because you allow it to speak and to beam its energy, and you're receptive to it. That requires a dilation of the heart-mind in order to listen or to observe or to hear the other. So I think this is at the heart of the art of dialogue, listening, and then speaking from a mindful place, mindful speaking, and not just speaking from your own perspective, which is really debate and diatribe and monologue, which is not the same as dialogue.
It truly is an art, and I think it is also a different state of consciousness. This kind of listening, where we put aside our usual sense of identity, we enter this space where we almost become an auditorium, where the other enters into that auditorium, non-judgmental, and yet, in some way, more essentially responsive to what is in that space, is, I have found a very different state of consciousness. It is a stillness, even though we may be talking or not. There is an internal stillness involved. And actually, as you say, it really is an art. It is something that needs to be discovered, not learned, but discovered as an aspect of ourselves.
I think that's quite true. And your main point here is that there's a different state of consciousness is huge. The monologue is, again, or ego-log, but one of the themes of our conversation tonight, is where you are looking at the other as an object, as an it, which is most of the way we live. We have a screen of consciousness, and we're looking through our lens, and we're processing ourselves and our world and our experience and everything through that, on that space. We don't realize that's objectification. And that's very different from the kind of consciousness that it takes to go in the zone, to show up and be open in that space and listen to the other and listen to the environment and flow with nature, whatever, or to be in the jazz or to be on the team. with the other. It's a transformed consciousness. So I-thou consciousness is a kind of meditative way of being in the world. That non-dual meditative flow, when you're in the zone, is a different technology of consciousness than the objectifying I-it way, where you're looking at objects and objectifying everything, including your own inner states. So I think that's a key point.
It really is. And I think meditation is a wonderful preparation for that expansion into space in which we become much more inclusive of everything around us. But, I want to touch on something that some people may accuse me of being somewhat mystical here. But over the years, I have noticed that the field itself that is established in dialogue has certain qualities. The field itself. It is hard to see this ordinarily because, in a sense, we have to be able to step back to such a degree within ourselves that we can appreciate it as something new rather than something that is we accept. Let me give you an example. Many times when we participate in this kind of dialogue, we have left the ego-log, we have moved into dialogue, and we leave such a meeting, we are energized. There's tremendous energy. People have told us they can't fall asleep after these kinds of dialogues. So there seems to be an energy available in this field as one of its qualities. There are others, but I'm interested in whether you've thought about it from this point of view, because we're really talking about the space that exists between us. What is it? And what are its qualities? From a scientific point of view, to me, it is very, very curious, and I'd love to explore it also from that point of view. What are the qualities of this space? I wonder what you think about that.
Again, you're right on it, Ron. It's an all-important point. For example, Buddha's version of it is that when you're in the monologue space, you're hurting and you're suffering. So his first axiom was existence is suffering. And not just suffering in terms of poverty or hunger, but suffering existentially in terms of the brokenness of your life and the environment, relationships, meaning. You don't have meaning in life. And to go into the Buddha field, in this language, where everything is flowing and interconnected, that was the whole point, and no atomic elements that are separable or separate. The quality of that field is life itself. And all of the teachers are getting this. Buddha would say, when you're mindful and you're in that zone, so to speak, of deep dialogue, meditative log, so to speak, you are touching the voltage of life itself. The field is flowing with abundant energy, life. And when you're cut off from that, it's pathetic, because it's as if you're almost starving. We metabolize when we're in dialogue and open space. The energy you're speaking about is absolutely real. And I find as a teacher, it's been 45 years at Haverford, teaching in my laboratory, so to speak, of the classroom as a laboratory of dialogue, to enter into the living energy of the texts that we're studying. You can tell when the class is not there, and you can tell when they float out of the room, and the energy and the voltage is high, and it's turned on, and their eyes are dilated. And that's what I try to do as a teacher, to help dilate the space and have them open up and enter into deep dialogue together. The energy is amazing when that happens.
It is indeed. It's a beautiful, beautiful thing. It reminds me of the manna that the Hebrews got in the desert to take them and to energize them on their journey, of course, in a much earlier state. Another quality of this field is that it tends to neutralize differences between people. And we have been very conscious of this because in being together for almost 18 years, there are many times where the meeting becomes very difficult. The ego does come back in. It is confrontational. And sometimes you just don't know how you're going to go further. And yet, by the time we leave the meeting or we return, it's very similar to childbirth in a way. If women remembered all the pain, that would be the end of the human race. But there is something that neutralizes differences between us. I think it is actually a quality of this magnificent field that we're talking about.
Absolutely right, and that's another huge point. I think you're hitting some of the major factors in it. And so when you're in dialogue flow, why does it neutralize dual differences? This is a major point. I mean, for example, if you look at democracy and the state of democracy, we the people, e pluribus unum, that's a great formula for dialogue. E pluribus unum means out of the many one, and out of the one many. It's not a reduction to a soup that where you don't have differentiation. It is where diversity is deepened, and yet we are in one space. That's the dialogos. So the great teachers understood that the fundamental field, by whatever name we use, Om, Yahweh, Tao, Allah, whatever name we use for the infinite field, but one of the qualities is that it is the source of our diverse worlds and perspectives and stories and identities and narratives. That's a science. The fundamental field funds and is the source of all possible worlds and stories and narratives and names. And yet, when we're in ego-log, we lose that connection, and therefore we go into deep polarity and violence and clash of worlds and 9/11s and Holocaust, genocides, breakdowns, divorces, because we can't connect and can't communicate. The communication requires us dialogos, to touch the logos, our common ancestry, our common basic ontological ground. When we're in the ground, we're touching the space of where our diversity meets. It's not that we give up our diversity. It certainly is altered from the way we were before in monologue. But the diversity in dialogue is magnificent. And that's where we find our common ground. And that's really the heart of conflict resolution and reconciliation after the most abysmal break in human beings.
Beautifully stated, Ashok. Really beautiful. Someone actually asked whether we're going to consider how dialogue involves the principles of democracy. And we don't have time to do it now. That's a fascinating subject of the evolution of a new democracy. But I think we don't right now have the time to do this. And it's a very important question. And in a way, we've been talking about it for this entire half hour. But the last thing that I would bring up that I think we touched on in our previous conversation is that it takes courage and commitment to enter an ongoing dialogue process. The ego will try to make its presence known in every one of us, and I don't think that there's anyone who enters into this kind of a process who initially at least will not feel an inner challenge of the ego, so that the support of others in holding the direction, the alignment of why we come together in the first place, is critical, and the support of the field, which seems to want itself to be known, is crucial. So, as you said, I believe, it takes courage to enter into the dialogue process.
That's quite true, and it takes courage because one becomes vulnerable and makes oneself vulnerable in going into dialogue by opening to the other and not having the phobias of alterphobia, I call it, fear of the other. The ego-based person has alterphobia because she has autophobia. It's fear of the self, fear of it, as often Mandela is quoted as saying, what terrifies us is not our smallness but our greatness, our magnificence and our beauty. You know, there's a phobia about that. So autophobia translates into alterphobia, the fear of the other, and we get and so to let that go takes great courage. And the great teachers knew it. There's a rite of passage. And in a way, to put it bluntly, you almost have to die to be born again into the space of dialogue. The rite of passage is a dimensional shift from the space of monologue to this magnificent space that you're speaking about so beautifully, Ron, that has these special qualities, the moral energy, the jazzing co-creativity and flow, the breath of life where we come to life and overcome the fragmentation and brokenness of the ego-mental space. So yes, it takes great courage, but to go through the rite of passage, because it's the ultimate terror of losing oneself and letting go of one's story. And so it takes great heart to enter into dialogue.
Well, Half an hour is up, and that is so beautiful, Ashok. When you're speaking, I almost hear something in three-quarter time and dancing. And I think we also had the other image of the dervishes whirling.
Yes, so we are dancing in dialogue.
Each one on their own axis of individual uniqueness, each one a part of a larger solar system around the sun that the Sheikh represents. It is really so beautiful to participate with you, and thank you. And I think
well, you're quite an artist, Ron. I really appreciate your voice, and you really hit beautiful themes. Thank you so much.
Hello, everyone. Oh, I'm breathless from dancing. I could have danced all night. Well, thank you so much, Ashok and Ron, for beautiful, beautiful dialogue. And the images are just swirling in my mind and colorizing and surfing and the web of presence and coming out of autophobia and ultraphobia. Oh, my God. And it's just absolutely beautiful. I want to thank you so much for leading us into this. And now I think I'd like to invite the rest of us into this beautiful field. We can all jump in the swimming pool because the water is great. The water of truth is just great. So I want to take just a few minutes to give you just an orientation to the Vistar method and how I can invite you to enter this field with us using this method that organically evolved over 18 years and before that with Ron and I. And it evolved with people just being in that field together, watching what happens. What happens when somebody speaks? What happens when a question is asked? What happens when names are used in a dialogue? What are the things that make that field more discoverable or more obvious, and what makes it more foggy? So that's what we began to explore very carefully. And so this method, which is now being used by the Shift Network and Barbara Marx Hubbard to start evolutionary circles all over the world. And so now I'm going to tell you just 4 guide rules that we've kind of evolved, that evolve with us, that help us. They're just like architectural points of significance that just open a space. They're like landing lights for the spaceship to come. And so these 4 guide rules of course we could speak about them, have a dialogue just about them for 2 hours. So I'm just going to tell them to you briefly because we're going to invite you to enter this dialogue with us. So the 4 guide rules are that that you press your 1 button on your keypad if you want to make a contribution. And Craig will actually unmute you and call your name, and then you can speak. The second guide rule is that to try to contribute on the topic. And, the topic we're talking about is ego log to dialogue. So try to make your contributions on the topic and try to speak for 1 to 2 minutes. And we're actually going to have Bettina Marie, who's on the phone with us, who's part of the Vistar team, be a time checker because we don't stop anybody, and it's self-regulating. But every once in a while we check in with Bettina to see if we've gone too far. That 1 to 2 minute. Notice it's even on the debates, on the presidential debates. This is not an arbitrary number. We watched it for a long time. I don't want to speak too much, but just to tell you, when we go over 2 minutes, something happens. We come out of metanoia into noia, nous, mind. So there's a lot more to say about all that. So just try the best you can. No one will correct you. And so guide rule number 3 is to hold your questions. We are going to have a question and answer following the Vistar Circle. We're going to have a question and answer, and you can ask questions to Ashok or Ron, myself, anybody you'd like, and questions will be answered. But this is not a question and answer format. Again, this is a huge consideration. It's something that has things in it about the Guru tradition. It has things in it about the postmodern mind. There's a lot involved in that guide rule. And these guide rules are changing and evolving now. We're asking you to evolve them. Every circle that we do is an evolutionary circle, which means we are evolving together, and these guide rules are evolving with us. The 4th guide rule is to address the whole and not any one person. So we don't speak and say, oh, I really love what Ashok said, or I don't quite agree with this person or that name, we have found that causes a lot of cross currents, and people start reeling out to the edges. So when we address the whole, just make your contributions to the whole. So the last thing I want to say before we start is that think of this as an orchestra. We're in an orchestra now. I'm playing the conductor part. Anyone can take the part of conductor or leader. And tonight we actually have two soloists. And as Ashok pointed out earlier in the green room, it's SOULISTS. We have two soloists. That's Ron and Ashok. So when they press their number one button, Craig will call on them whenever they do that, because they're our soloists. And they may speak a little longer than 1 or 2 minutes. Because if you know an orchestra, we all play our part, we know the script, we know we're the instrument, and we're the best in that instrument to be in this kind of orchestra. This is the orchestra of dialogue. So we're all virtuosos. And so we play our instrument, we play our part, and the soloists go and take us to higher places than we come in. But the most important thing that I leave you with to remember is that we're listening for the music. We are playing our part, but we're listening to the music. We're not listening even to the soloist. We're listening to the music, to the entire, to the whole. So with that vision in mind, what I'd like to do is have a moment of silence, and then I will open up the field and make a contribution and open to everyone else. So let's start with a moment of silence. Thank you. So we are here because we know that we are connected. I don't think we would have found ourselves on a call like this or answered this kind of a request to come together in this way. So we are here because we already know that. And we're here to dive deeper into this field together in whatever contribution. And everything in that field is acceptable. That's what we have found about the field. It accepts everything. Nothing can be left out. Nothing can be avoided. Because we need, right here and now, we are making a contribution to the evolutionary shift, right here, by coming together. And just the way we are, and everything that is with us here. So I invite you to the field and open the dialogue. So please press number 1 if you'd like to make a contribution.
Okay. Kat Henry.
Hello, good evening. There are two pieces that are emerging for me in this. The one is the dilating of the heart-mind space. There's a strong resonance of that, just the idea of dilating. I can literally see that. I can feel that. This opening up, this creating a space to allow things to move into the heart space and move into the mind space. The second piece that has come up for me is the discussion of the terms, the etymology of these terms: dialogue, individuality, monologue, and thinking about how even the words that we choose in dialogue are important, and they have meaning, and they have a history, and they have an etymology, and they're intentional. So moving into dialogue using words that are intentional and have depth and meaning and history. These are the things that are coming up. Thank you.
Harvey Austin.
Hello, everybody. First of all, I want to acknowledge Ron and Ashok for not only speaking about dialogue, but actually being in dialogue. Second, my natural language is English, and also my natural language is ego-logish. Being raised at this particular time in history, I speak and listen ego-logish to everybody around me. And when I speak from ego-logish and try to speak about dialogish, it's really very, very difficult. I listened to the presidential debates the other night, and to me that is the greatest ego-log I've heard. And to me, there's some critical words in ego-logish. One is, I'm right, you're wrong, and I'm going to prove it. Another one is the term speak. I'm only interested in speaking when I'm in ego-logish. I have no interest in listening. In fact, all the time you're speaking, I'm here countering everything and preparing what I'm going to say. And it seems to me very important that as we learn dialogish, we intensively study what it means to speak in natural default ego-logish. And I think that's all I want to say about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Harvey. Yes, this is Victoria. That is really true. Just being able to see where that ego-logish, as you put it, the ego-log comes in, being able to observe that and become aware of it. Because we can't just decide that we're not going to do it. We just can't say, I'm just going to be a dialoguer and never speak from the ego. So we found that the observation of it and awareness of it, and there's so many tools to deal with, but basically the most important thing is just to listen to that whole, what the whole needs, rather than even listening to one individual. Just listen to the whole, listen to the space between us and what that is calling out.
Nahid.
Hello. Hi, everyone. What I have, yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes. What I have experienced is the dialogue truly, it is not with another one, but it's the dance between individual's mind and the heart. And if the commitment to one's own evolution is already there, we are aware of that, and we drop into that space of the heart. I have experienced there is not really a lot of work to be done. It's just the space is provided for the dance in the field, and there is a listening there. And I have a recent experience of myself that when I am not aware of the heart space within myself, in a different way, I'm saying that I am not attentive to my own needs, nurturing my own soul, then the other one becomes the mirror of that, the lack of the space of what I have not provided for me. And so that's where the monologue, the egologue, is activated and is operating. So during the process, what I'm learning is truly, Ashok, thank you, you brought it to language. It's truly, really, is the death in every moment. It's whatever we call it. Death is more a stronger word, but letting go of that which arises, noticing it, and diving again into the space of one's own heart. And the dance is eternal, and the evolution is on the way. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Nahid.
Dr. Janet Smith-Warfield.
Hi, Ashok and Ron. There is so much depth here. I hardly know where to start. But one of the things that is coming up for me as I hear you dialogue, and you truly were doing a beautiful dance of dialogue together, is the language of metaphor. And three metaphors are particularly coming up for me right now, and I can't go into all of them in any depth, but one is this idea of Indra's net, where each one of us perhaps is a pearl in that net, which reflects every other pearl in the net. A second metaphor that comes up for me is the metaphor of a holarchy. Does each one of us within ourselves contain the whole? And when we find that whole or that integrity within ourselves, are we simply a reflection of every other holon in the universe? And then the third metaphor that was coming up for me when you were talking about egologue and dialogue was the labyrinth. And it seems to me there, at least in terms of a personal evolution, the path into the center of the labyrinth is very different from the path out. And perhaps the choices going in are very different in that it seems to me there's a stage where we almost need to be very egocentric as we're breaking away from all the conditioning that we've been born into. The path out is coming back into the world and connecting with both everything internally but also everyone externally, because we can see in everyone else all the parts of ourselves that we discovered on the way in.
And also, this is Victoria, that sense that we are the whole. I consider all the time the statement, I want to be part of something. And that word apart, that keeps us apart. We want to be part of something. And so it's hard for the mind to imagine, I guess, but I don't think we're part of something. I think we are the whole. We are the whole of everything. So that one time I had a mentor and somebody said to him, there's a part of me that doesn't like to do this. And he said, how many parts of you are there? So we're always saying that, part of me wants that, part of me doesn't, and part of me doesn't want to do this, but that could not be true. So that sense that there is only the whole is just very penetrating.
Elizabeth Harold.
Yes, hello. Thank you for this wonderful conversation. I would, one thing that came to me was the idea, in a way, it is a puzzle or a paradox that, in fact, the dialogue can be an omnilogue or a metalogue in the idea of intranet. Is it when we are fully present and riding the movement of the expanding universe, we are speaking to and from each one of us and all of us. And that deep presencing of listening and speaking from the heart allows the dialogue to expand beyond the dyad into the omni with every word, with every breath.
Ron.
Thank you, Victoria. I think one of the issues that comes up, which creates a lot of confusion and has created problems throughout our history, is that people do not really define or speak about the state of consciousness from which they are speaking. This is really a very crucial issue. In ordinary states of consciousness, where we are, as Ashok has been telling us, very much programmed by our society, by its lens, and so forth, we speak one way and we have disagreements in that state of consciousness. There are other states of consciousness. States of deep dialogue is another state of consciousness in which this kind of thinking does not exist. It begins to dissolve. So the realization that there are different states of consciousness from which we speak to each other is really crucial and very important in understanding much of the violence and source of conflict in our civilization.
Tina.
Sorry, did you call Christina?
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, thank you. Wow, yeah. I feel it's absolutely exhilarating to be here on this phone call, this conference call right now, and dialoguing and sharing in all of this. I mean, I feel that the energy is it's just pulsating through me to tell you the truth. It's just pulsating through me, and it's as if I feel a little lightheaded, really, in terms of my own state. I feel almost in an altered state, in that what I'm hearing are aspects of what I would say. In other words, it's as if I am what is being said, regardless of the sound, regardless of the words, regardless of who's saying it. It's just fascinating, and I feel that is so much a part of what we're talking about here, this experience. So that's just glad to be able to share that.
Thank you. Thank you, Christina.
Elliot Robertson.
Greetings. I have two different thoughts. First of all, I had a moment years and years ago when I had a dialogue with a tree. It was very brief. And also I've read about somebody who's very advanced, a bestseller author who had a very lengthy dialogue with a tree. And then on another note, I've been having conversations with my heart every day. And so that's just, an intimate dialogue with myself, and that's all that I have to share.
Well, there's a lot of smiles, I think, when we think of a dialogue with the trees. I think that could be let's see if we have anything on that. Can we take that from a little side trip here for a moment? And let's be a little bit poetic about that. We're so intense about our dialogue with other humans. What could we say about that? That a dialogue with the trees, so much a part of our life. We're with them all the time. We're in Connecticut here. We're surrounded. Right now where I'm sitting, we're surrounded by trees of gold. What are they saying?
Douglas Bonar.
Got an email today I thought was real interesting. It was from a Native American friend, and it was ended in Lakesh. That's INLAK-ECH, and it says in parentheses, I am another yourself. And I don't know what Native American tribe it's from, but it just, to me, it's like the namaste greeting, that recognizing that I am another you. I am one with the tree. Certainly I can have dialogue with the tree, because in the Moses Code, a book, The Moses Code by James Twyman, he says, I am that I am. He puts the comma in a different place than Moses had meant it. I am that I am, which makes the dialogue very rich, because we're seeing the interconnectedness, our oneness, or our wholeness with each other, recognizing that we are indeed accessing the global mind, the Christ consciousness, the Buddha self. So this takes it to a totally different level when I can get out of my ego consciousness and see the connection between me and the other, whether the other be an animal, a tree, a star, that we are one, we are connected. So namaste, everybody.
So I'd like to ask our soloist, Ashok, come in. We need a little aria.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, hi. Well, I'm appreciating these very thoughtful, flowing voices. It's very amazing. I'm just taking a few notes as I heard from each person speaking from the heart beautifully. Thank you all. And the question perhaps of this, I am another yourself, or dialogue with tree, for example. I mean, the fabric of the field, by whatever name we call it, it is dialogos. Let's call it the logosphere. I call it logosophia. Because the feminine principle of the Sophia, my field is philosophia. Wisdom is Sophia. So the logosophia is the field of script. In the beginning is the word, but not the word, the ego word, the logos word, the infinite word. It's script, the Akashic field. And people don't seem to get that everything is scripting. And in that sense, to have a dialogos with a tree, or with the ocean, or with the stars, or with another creature of whatever kind, or with your own heart or your own body. Listen to your body. How many of us have the art of listening to our body? Our body is giving us information. Our body has wisdom. It's not the ego body, the higher body, the body of Sophia, that we are, the temple that we are moving in. If we realize it's a temple, and we can listen to our bodies, for example, and our hearts, all of these metaphors that we're hearing are just quite appropriate and apropos, and makes tremendous sense. I know it may sound woo-woo to people. Oh, you're dialoguing with trees. Someone might make a joke about a new agey. Oh, I've got a tree-hugging friend that is trying to get me to do feng shui and move my. You have to put it down. But tree huggers, in the real sense, if you really understand it, are just tapping the logosphere, the script in which everything is speaking. If we could listen to the sunset, and listen to nature, listen to the crickets. For example, I was at an indigenous retreat in Albuquerque. I go to the Seed University, where they bring indigenous elders and wisdom keepers together with frontier scientists. And one of the persons presented the sounds, you may have heard this, the sounds of crickets. If you slow it down in the frequency, as she did when she presented this talk, everyone was in tears because it was a sound of cathedral music. The crickets were making sacred sounds when we could really get in sync with the frequency by modifying it. Can you imagine that the crickets, if you could listen, are symphonic, are really, as you were saying, Victoria, this is an orchestra and the symphony. They're part of the song. They're part of the symphony. So all of nature is singing, and that is built into the science. And in a way, it's known that if Om is the ultimate word and frequency, then we can see that music pervades the entire universe because everything is ratio and measure and number and harmony and even reason and rhyme and ratio and proportionality, all connected. So this whole universe is a beautiful Gita, a beautiful song. So I would say namaste on that note.
Yes, and can you hear me, Craig?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm just feeling also that we're experimenting with this virtual Vistar method, and there was a time that we tried this entire call the way everyone is on it now, where we unmuted everyone, so that the sounds. This implies that everyone has to be still to the best of the degree they can and find a place of quiet, because of course there are dogs barking and paper moving and a lot of things happening. But that experiment, maybe we could do it another time where we're all unmuted and everybody's really in that kind of attention, because we've all learned now to multitask while we're on conference calls. But that's even the sound of the open airwaves on a call, and to hear people breathing and to hear just amazing things, even a door closing, something like that. Well, actually, I really, one thing is that we want to explore that with people very much, that total experience, unmuted, naked on this call.
Okay, Margie.
Hi. Several things have been coming to me through this entire process. I think the first thing that had come was the freedom that I find within the Vistar method. And as I've been listening tonight, I'm more fully appreciating where it's coming from. I think, being human for me, this aloneness, the loneliness, and having to feel like I have to take care of everything. In Vistar, I lose that, and I feel that I am in resonance with everyone around me, and it's just totally beautiful. And so I thank you, Ron and Victoria. We've been having some wonderful, wonderful experiences in our Vistar group. The second thing is I had to comment about the tree, that that resonates so strongly, because that has been a major, major connectedness for me in my lifetime. And thirdly, I didn't see how a Vistar could really occur as it is tonight, but I am resonating, I am vibrating. It's been beautiful, totally beautiful. So thank you all.
Okay.
Thank you.
John Pett.
Thank you for the privilege to listen and the opportunity to contribute. My contribution is to recognize that there's one universal law that we all have to obey. That's the law of our prime mover, or uncaused cause, which creates the law of common sense. Common sense really connects us. It brings us together, and it is the reason we all, virtually every group, every religion, comes to a similar universal value system, which includes love and includes the golden rule. And it seems that when we recognize common sense, which is available to every religion and every group, that's one of the ways we convert egologue into dialogue. So that's my contribution. I think that we become involved in dialogue when we recognize the universal laws of common sense, and that's where we derive our morality and spirituality. That's what I have to contribute. Thank you.
Okay. Eric Troth.
Yes, hello. And I'm just taking a moment to pause before I speak so that I can forget what I was wanting to say. Listen, I mean, really to take that injunction to listen, to listen to the body, to listen to, that excitement of wanting to say something, but, to really listen into the space between right now and the context of our coming together and just how deep that can go right now. Let that wash over me right now. Wow. Feeling, what is that movement, being aware of my own state of consciousness as I hear Ron making that invitation and noticing, as I think it was Harvey early, had, not others, but, just the pointing out of, what it is to be in ego-logic mode and to sense that in myself and see what is it that I can do to drop that and what is the posture of leaning into the center of the circle, that not only my ears are oriented towards that, but my heart is open to that, and I'm sensing into that space and discovering it's not different from myself, that I am that. Changing my whole relationship to that, my whole identity around that. Lead for now.
Well, the field has found the perfect ending, perfect orchestration right now. And so let's close with a moment of silence, and we'll move into the next part of our journey. Thank you, everybody, for this beautiful, beautiful dialogue. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so Ashok and Ron, isn't this amazing? We had a call flow that we didn't look at, and we're right at the question and answer point, and we are 2 minutes off. So I think that there is a plan. So I'd like to open things up for questions and answers now. Anybody who has a question for Ashok or for Ron, for me, please just just press 1 on your keyboard, and any question you may have, we're here to answer any request.
Okay. A Seltzer.
Good evening. This has just been amazingly wonderful. I have a question about what does one do when you become aware of two people talking on two different levels, I guess is the way I would ask it. Ashok, you talked about that. Could you, I guess my question would be, is there a way to connect when that does happen, or is it impossible to do?
That's a great question, and it's the name of the game, actually. It's always happening, and it's happening in all of our great traditions as well. I mean, for example, if you read the Bhagavad Gita, and Arjuna is so deeply steeped in ego log, and his life is broken down, he dropped his weapon, his facing a family fratricidal war, which is a metaphor for the ego-log. And he's turning to Krishna, which is now his charioteer, the Om voice, the dialogue being. And it opens up, of course, they're talking at two different levels. And so how is Krishna going to help Arjuna move out of his impaled position and to liberate himself from the samsara, as it's called, into the nirvana, into the Om field, to go into the zone, to become an awakened martial artist? And so the coaching and the brilliance of the art is that Krishna must understand if he doesn't speak to Arjuna where he is, then he'll lose him. But if he only speaks at that level of egoish or egolish, whatever the name is that we used, then he's undermined the whole process, and he's undermined the best interest of his listener. So the art of dialogue, and Janet mentioned metaphors, and the three metaphors she mentioned, but metaphoric language is a bridge. Metaphor is the power to bridge the alternative dimensions, whatever they may be. So if you're talking across two different words, suppose someone is in pro-life and someone is pro-choice, and the pro-choice person believes, I listen to the law of God and abortion is murder, and the other person is saying, I listen to my constitutional rights of freedom and my free voice and personal choice, and you take that away from me, you take away my life is free. They're speaking two different languages. They're speaking two different ideologies or orientations or cultures or whatever you want to call it. So it's typical that in the scene of dialogue, monologue is proceeding and not true engagement. So the artist of dialogue, the mediating force, has to be able to find some way to move it into mindful. And many of the beautiful voices we heard we're being mindful of when we're in ego-log. If you become mindful of that, and you begin to dilate, to pick up Kat's opening point about noticing dilation, that the metaphor in moving from an ego-log to dialogue expands the word in its power. You can go from ego time into the high awakened now time, and it's unbroken in that transition, in that bridging, in the in-betweenness that we are all noticing is so profound. The silence and the music of silence between is the bridging of the logosphere. So there is a continuum that allows the possibility for a Jesus to coach his disciples, or Buddha to teach his students, or Krishna to help Arjuna learn the art of the higher literacy, to going from the ego-ish to the dialogue script language. And so yes, that is the name of the game, and it's an art form to be able to mediate that, especially when worldviews are in deep collision and broken.
Thank you.
If I could just add to that, many times during our previous dialogue, I was thinking of the parables of Christ and how he taught in parables, which relates very much to what you're saying about this dual or bi-level presentation. But just to also address that question, that when someone is willing to enter into this kind of dialogue space, the way the others are holding the space, their presence and their awareness, actually can help the individual who is in ego-log hear themselves. This is actually one of the other qualities of dialogue space, and that is one can hear oneself. We describe it as an echo chamber relative to the dialogue space, that one can actually hear when they are out of sync or their frequency is off to the frequency of the space, the sound, the invisible sound of the dialogue space. And others who are present at that time are very important in terms of, let's say, the silence they decide to hold if someone is having difficulty. So this may sound a little bit mystical, but it's very, very real. The space in dialogue has a presence, and it lets you hear yourself. There's a feedback, and it's a wonderful, wonderful quality of that space.
Thank you so much. That is really helpful, and I have had that experience, and I didn't realize what was happening. So this has been very helpful. Thank you.
Great.
Warner John.
Hello, thank you for this conversation. My question concerns so many of the sages that have said that we are returning to oneness on our path. And I'm wondering what the returning means to both of you. I was just listening to a book on tape today called The Old Way, and it's about the Kalahari Bushmen, who I think we all know kind of are a template for where we've come from. And it struck me that they have a word for all of the other small groups in their area, besides their own little group, and the word means the bad people. It seems to me that if we are returning, then we're returning in spirit rather than in our actual history as a species. So I was wondering if you could comment on that.
Ron, would you like to?
It's a beautiful, actually, to ask that question opens up a very poetic space in itself. This issue of the return. Kenneth George Mills, who was our second teacher, an extraordinary metaphysician and Renaissance man, spoke about the process of discovery. That's the way he phrased it. To discover our essential nature, to discover the logos. So, in a sense, the return is to the most fundamental essence of what we actually are. Journey to discover that. And there are other ways of looking at it now, which are in the evolutionary sphere, which I just want to mention, which is that we are actually evolving. Consciousness itself is actually evolving. So the discovery is really an ongoing process or a changing process or a journey of the realization of our own evolving consciousness. So these are somewhat different ways of looking at this, and I think they're both very, very beautiful, and our own experience needs to deal with that. Ashok, if you would.
Well, yes, I love the question, and it comes up in my teaching class all the time if we're doing Socrates and Plato, and Socrates is trying to teach his friends that knowledge is remembering, not gaining fresh information, but remembering in the sense that the depth of the logos has all of our deep within our soul. We're carrying all of that knowledge, all of that akashic knowledge. But when we are embodied, we somehow have forgotten it. So we have amnesia. And so the journey of philosophy is one of remembering. So that's one version of return. In the yoga tradition, I think it was Werner who asked this question about the sages speaking of this metaphor of return across the planet. And I think it's really called upon by this primal field. The consensus of our great sages across the planet is that there's a fundamental infinite force field, and we can't get around it. And not that we're trying to. Get around it in the sense you can't deny it. If you try to make it finite, that doesn't work. If you make it more than one, that doesn't work. It's got to be infinitely one. And if that's true, and one of our earlier comments was about the universal law from which all of our lives flow, and we're in touch with that, the common sense, that was absolutely right on it. So our great sages understand that when you have in the ego perspective, the ego's lens places its own agenda first. But the journey of wisdom is to cross into the field of dialogue in which there's an inversion and a reorientation when you enter into the first field that reorients you to realize this was my home all along. Because one of the great revelations across the planet in global wisdom is that we're never outside of this infinite field. It's always here now already because it's infinite. The ego stories and the ego mind cannot break out of the circuit of the infinite field. So our home is always with us. Our higher self is always with us. So awakening in our journey is returning home, returning to what was always there from the beginning. But that takes the inversion from monologue into dialogue, and then the returning, then this metaphor makes sense. That's one way of looking at it. So for example, in yoga, it's not just only in spirit that you're returning. You're remembering your body. You're coming in touch with your body. Yoga is union with your being. So when you're doing deep yoga, you're discovering and remembering and returning to your primal body that was there all along, but gets eclipsed by the ego mind.
Okay. Shelley Darling. Shelley?
Yes, here I am. Thank you, Craig, and hello, everyone. I feel like we've gone through different stages because I pushed that button minutes and minutes ago, and I feel like in a completely different land when I push that button, which is that's the joy of this experience that's being spoken about tonight, is that it's the movement of our consciousness, being delightfully swept up in this emergent field through what's being spoken tonight. And, from, different things that you've shared, Ashok, and I just want to drop this in so that I don't forget, but, anyway, I'll just keep on going. I'll come back to it later. But, yeah, so I feel that this space that happens in our collective consciousness in the sharing is an evolutionary practice. And I feel like it's the essential practice that's going on in every circle, every conversation I'm having is this vital, I want to call it a need to come together to experience who we really are in the Song of Songs. When you go back and you think about the Cathar and Magdalene and Yeshua, this Song of Songs, to me, this is what is being spoken tonight. This high level of reception. Some people have talked about a dance, and Victoria's talked about the orchestra, the symphony. So I just feel really humbled that, to me, this is the $1 million happening. I don't know, someone walked into the house and I was just like, oh my God, So I just want to thank everyone for showing up in the purity of the moment, and that what we're doing and what the field is doing to us is the great softening, the great opening. That we think about, we got to create the new world. We got to create the new world. There's so many people talking about that, but I feel like through this experience, we are in the happening of it through us. So thank you.
Thank you, Shelley, and thank you for everything you do. And I know we still have some more questions, but I'm afraid we're going to have to go to some closing statements and finish up our evening. I just feel that language here has been so beautiful, I have to say, and that all the images that have come through have been extremely poetic, extremely high vortex here of beauty and meaning, so much meaning. And so I'd like to ask Ron to say a few words. Maybe Ashok will go first so you can read your poem, okay? Ashok, if you want to say a few last words to us, and then Ron has a poem, and then perhaps we could close up.
Well, thank you so much. It's been a joy to you share his words about a joy of the movement here, being with you in this circle, and it's a delightful circle. And I've heard many sharing from the heart, really authentic, and it resonates and it adds to the energy and it builds up. So I really feel it. And the last comment about this is the big one. The big evolutionary issue is to occupy the self, to occupy the space. If there's an Occupy movement, I say to my students, you can occupy Wall Street or Main Street, but let's occupy self. Let's occupy now. Let's occupy presence. That's a space of deep dialogue. And that's the world. If we can occupy presence, then we are realizing ourselves in our deepest way. And that's what our great enlightened wisdom teachers across the planet, in their very diverse ways, have been calling us to be that self and be in dialogue and experience the flow and the joy and the bliss. The word joy is appropriate. That's why it's called nirvana. I would like to make that link because a consensus is when you're in the field, when you're in the logosphere, when you're surfing the zone. Why is that peak performance such bliss and fulfillment? Why is it nonviolent? Why is it fulfillment? And that's really the maturation of the self. The evolutionary journey culminates in that space of the dance, which is never ending and always deepening and always learning. And that really came out in our dialogue. It's an ongoing learning, jazzing through life, heads up in the moment, being that moment. That's a joyful way to be. So that's the joy of dialogue. Thank you so much for having me join you today.
Well, thank you so much, Ashok. I mean, it's been really a privilege, and it has been music, and it's been a dance to dance with you and with everyone, all the participants. The thing that strikes me about the contributions that were made is what I hear is really the depth behind the contributions. I hear people's presence and intention and commitment. And the contributions are the surface of it. Because in this space of the dialogue that we're having, one can feel the tension, presence, which is behind actual words. I think it's really very beautiful. And I just wanted to finish with a quick poem that relates to the issue of listening, attention, and look, how we look at each other in the dialogue space, called Unaccustomed Looking. Beyond attention's careless span lies another dimension, emerging from perception's familiar fog that we used to call real. Add silence to this unaccustomed looking, we become the auditorium in which the universe's secrets are silently whispered. I once knew a woman, a dubious, daggered, and tired relationship of many years, transformed by a not knowing looking to God sitting before me. Everything about her embraced by a feeling that I would have to call love. So thank you all. It's been a wonderful experience.
Yes, thank you, Ashok and Ron. I feel like you led us into a great ballroom and the ballroom of dialogue, and this has been a beautiful dance. And so thank you, everyone, Janet, and all my friends on the call, and the Vistar team, and thank you, Craig, for this. And so, Craig, I give it to you to close the field.
Well, the field is ever open, and it was truly a rich call, and I'm sure that many of us will want to re-listen to this. And so before I close out, I will just remind everyone that the recording of this dialogue. Hello? Okay, we seem to have some difficulties. The recording will be available in about another day or so if you just go on to www.vistarfoundation.org and scroll down to the bottom left-hand side. You'll see the recording there for this call, and you can re-listen to it whenever you'd like. And we'll also send an email out just to remind you when it's available. So thank you, everyone, for your participation. I'm now going to unmute the whole entire call so everybody can say good night.
Good night.
Bye.
Good night. Good night.
Thank you.
Great love. Thank you. Thank you.
What is the